Thank you for tuning into our podcast, Canal Days, and what life is like in the industrial Connecticut River Valley of Massachusetts. I'm your host, Carrie, and joining me is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Como. He offers both public and private tours, as well as presentations of historical sites within communities throughout Massachusetts. Currently, the communities that he focuses on this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and East Hampton, also Granby and Amherst as well. His tours focus on the canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as parks, houses, and streets. He personally gives all of his presentations and tours himself. So in today's episode, we will be discussing the 6 navigational canals of the Connecticut River. So, where are these 6 navigational canals located, and what are their names?
All right, so if you want to get freight up the Connecticut River, up to population centers higher up into Connecticut and Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, you have to navigate up that river, which wasn't always navigable. And so you had to cut in canals called canalize. And so 6 canals ended up being put in along this Connecticut River to make it navigable. And I'll tell you what these 6 are in order of when they were put in by year. And the first 2 should be considered twins of each other, made by the same company, have same designer and contract firm. And South Hadley Falls was the first one, and it was called the South Hadley Falls Canal. It was about 2.5 miles long. And that allowed people to get very high up because all through Connecticut it was navigable. And sure, there was rough spaces sometimes, but this one allowed them finally to get up from Long Island Sound all the way up to Turner's Falls. And Turner's Falls was the next one put in. 3 years after the South Hadley one was put in, the Turner's Falls Canal was put in. It's in Montague, Massachusetts, called the Turner's Falls Canal. It's about 3 miles long. And once that one was put in, freight boats can go from Long Island Sound now up to a third of the way up Vermont. And then finally they reached a place they were blocked. And they were blocked at Bill's Falls. So that was the location of the next one. The true name of the town is Rockingham, Vermont. And the canal's name is Bellows Falls Canal. It was only half a mile long. And once that one was put in, boats can now go all the way up from Long Island Sound to White River Junction. And at that point, in 1810 or 1806, the Sumner's Fall Canal was put in. It was put on the New Hampshire side of the Connecticut River at a place called Lebanon, New Hampshire. And it used to be called the Wattaquechee Falls, and I wish they called the canal that, but it was called the Sumner Falls Canal. And then the highest one to the north was called the Old Cut Falls Canal, and it was put in at a place in New Hampshire called Hartford, a place in Vermont called Hartford, Vermont. And finally, you could reach the very tip of anything that could be navigated. Now, one was put in much later. That was the Enfield Falls Canal, put in between Windsor Locks, Connecticut, up to Suffolk, Connecticut. It was 5.2 miles long. And from that point on, you could have ships go 220 miles up from Long Island Sound up to Barnet, Vermont, before they could not go any further.
And what are some of the properties of these navigational canals?
Okay, the navigational canals, typically they'd be 15, 16, 17 feet wide to allow the freight ship to get through. Typically they'd have many locks. Some only had 2 locks, well, some had 10 locks. It depends how much lift you need to get through. 3 of the canals were at places called the Great Falls. And that was South Hadley Falls, Turner Falls, and Bellows Falls. And typically through the locks are about 75 feet long and about maybe 20 feet wide. and typically the locks would have to open upstream, and you can get through to the next lock or back onto the Connecticut River. And most of them were built early on, from 1795 to 1810, where the last one put in, which is the first one you reach, was put in much later because it wasn't superbly necessary that people could pull through or use hoists to get through the Enfield Falls. So typically they came around early 1800s. And also they didn't need to be that deep because they were flatboats, and you could slowly get upstream with a flatboat, even though it didn't have a bow to it. But the good point, the draft of it into the water was only 1 or 2 feet deep. So you can build a canal 4 feet deep and you'd be quite happy.
And quickly, before we continue with our interview, just to fill our listeners in, for more information or to sign up for various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org, and there you can find videos and podcasts of the stops along each tour, as well as photos and text of the historical sites as well. And for private tours and other inquiries, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And his tours make for fun educational outdoor activities for families and group parties. So getting back to our interview, you have individual podcasts for each one, but give us a brief summary of each.
Oh, fine. For instance, the South Valley one was the first one built, and is probably the first canal for navigation in the United States. It has a competition with Louisiana, but Louisiana was outside the United States at that point. And also, typically, they lasted about half a century, 50 years, to about 60 years before they were replaced. The railroad by 1945 was almost the entire length of the Connecticut River. And since it was cheaper and faster on a train, freight dealers would use trains instead. The Turner's Falls one, it's been replaced by a power canal, but a lot of them have. And so in the fourth question, I'm going to tell you each one became. And the Bells Falls one is cut right through the village of Bells Falls. And that's unique because when you go there, you can walk right down a bike path, and to the side is still this old canal. Even though it's changed somewhat, it's still there. And then the 2 upper ones I never visited, but they were very high up. And I found out a lot about them. One, the Sumner Falls Canal, was cut into the rock where all the others were dig into soil. The Sumner Falls one was blasted and picked out with shovels. Luckily, it was only about 250 feet long. The Enfield one is also with a bike path, and that makes it easier to look at and get to.
And what has become of these canals?
All right, each one has become something else along the way. You don't have a hole in the ground and then leave it there to do nothing. The Industrial Revolution came along. Navigation of canals wasn't as useful because the railroads came through, but the Industrial Revolution was at its height. And so a hole in the ground next to water is useful because you can put a power canal through there. You put mills between the canal and the river, and you have factories that can have a water put below them through a tunnel or race, hit turbines, and give those mills power, called hydromechanical power. And how else did they change along the way? You now have a power canal giving hydromechanical power. What happens when, in, say, 1895, your town or city has an electrical power station put in? Put it right on the canal, because that canal water, as a power canal, could now be used for power to make hydroelectric power. All right, and even maybe that went away because hydroelectric power is not in great favor. It used to be the number 1 source of energy a half century ago in the United States. Now it's number 5 and about to be number 6. So what else can you do? You can put a bike path along old canal bed. You can put it along the old railroad beds that are next to these canals. And that's what Enfield Turner's Falls, Bellows Falls has done. They put recreational areas, including a bike path, next to them. So they've changed with the times, and they all six of them still have at least remnants, and in three cases, still have the canal going through.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours. And we want to thank, and historical topics of your expertise. And thank you to our sponsors. And of course, we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And check out a large selection of our other podcasts at his website, as well as on SoundCloud.com. And be sure to stay up to date with new podcasts and videos posted daily. Thank you, and hope you join us again.